All right, Rabbi, good morning, a good tevach. We have had a beautiful, uplifting, inspirational Shabbos Hagadol, and what a schus it is, Baruch Hashem, to begin another week with the Daf, another week with our beloved Daf, another week in masechtos Sotah. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning. To thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Nissan, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating all the Shmuel drushos this month in memory of Paul's parents, Shmuel ben Zechariah and Sarah bas Avrohom. To thank Avraham and Shaindy Kelman for dedicating all the Shurman drushos this month in memory of Avraham's mother, Sarah Bryna bas Yehoshua Heschel. To thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today. So David Kramer, very beautiful, in honor of the entire Shiur and his Eishes Chayil. Listen to this dedication. Who through her encouragement, I've been able to complete the following, the masechtos of Yevamos, Kesubos Nedarim and Nazir. 3.5 years ago, completion of these masechtos were not even a dream to be on my bucket list. What a beautiful, beautiful dedication. Okay? To have proper akar satov to the people in our life who really encourage us in Meretz Hashem to do more and to be more. Also with that, let us begin. Today's daf is daf Dalet. Thank you. Today's daf is daf Dalet. We are picking up on the bottom of Gimel Amud Beis. We actually made some good headway yesterday. These dafim still adjusting to the length of Sotah dafim, right? It was so different than Nedarim and Nazir. Okay, so we are picking up in Meretz Hashem Gimel Amud Beis, and we left off yesterday 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 lines up from the bottom. It says Tanan Hasan. So we learned Shahibidin. One could have made a Kavachomer. What's the Kavachomer? Uma Eidos Harishona Shein Osarta Isra Olam. The first Eidos, which of course is referring to Kinui, right? To warning. So the Eidos regarding Kinui, which of course does not go ahead and create an ongoing Isra, right? Remember again, what are the ramifications of getting, let's read through it. So again, Kinui, which itself, Kinui, which itself does not create an ongoing Isra, in a Meskem Zapachos Mishnayim, requires two witnesses. Remember again, based on the Mishnah, leaving aside the position of Rabbi Yossi, who we saw in yesterday's daf, everyone else agrees that Allah Chalamais, you need two Eidim for Kinui. So Kinui, which doesn't create ongoing Isra, requires two Eidim, Eidos Achrona Shosarta Isra Olam. Eido Din Shlot Iskayim Pachos Mishnayim. So we'll say, so certainly again, Eidos Achrona. Now in this context, Rashi says that Achrona ultimately means Tumah. So Tumah should certainly, which remember again, Tumah, we were speaking about this idea that Tumah could be established even through Eid Echad, but Tumah, which does create an eternal Isser, remember again, that would essentially dissolve the marriage, should require two witnesses. Talmud Lomar ve'eid ein ba. So let's remember again, we go back to that drasha that we had on Beis Amud Aleph, ve'eid ein ba kol sheyesh, but that teaches us no, any form of eidos, even in Eid Echad, is enough by Tumah. I have the Kavachomer Le'edis Harishona. So if that's the case, let's make the Kavachomer. What's the Kavachomer? The Gemara says, "Me'ata uma edus ha'achrona shosarta isra olam miskemes be'ed echad." If Tumah, which does create ongoing Isser, right? Remember again, once there's an Eid Echad by Tumah, effectively the marriage is over. So ultimately, and that can be done even with an Eid Echad. Edus Harishona. So we'll say again, the Rishona over here in this context means stira. Rashi says, Eidos HaRishona, the earlier Eidos Stira, She'enu Sarta Isra Olam, Eno Dish Tzkaim Be'ed Echad. Certainly again, so we'll say, so if Tumah, which does create ongoing Isser, can be established through Eid Echad, then Stira should be established through Eid Echad as well. Talmud Lomar, Ki Matzah Ba Ervas Dover. The Pasuk says, he found in her a matter of Erva, Ulahalanu Omer Api Shne Eidim or Api Shlosh Eidim Yakum Davar. Rabbi said this is the famous Gezer Shav of Davar from Mammon. So Umad Davar Omer Lahalan Api Shne Eidim. Just like by monetary matters, Davar means two witnesses. Afkan Api Shnaim. So to over here, when it comes to Stira, you're going to require two witnesses. Two words. 1 second. Hi Michi Matzah Ba Ervas Davar Nafka Mi Ba Nafka. But that's not where we learn that from. Also, we learn that from the pasuk of Ba. Right? Ki matzah ba ervas da. In other words, ve'edein ba. Sorry, ve'edein ba teaches us that it's only for Tumah that an Eid Echad is enough. And from that, I could infer that for every other stage, one is going to require bona fide eidos. To which the Gemara says, Ba v'lo b'kinoi. Ba v'lo b'stira mi ba'ilei. To which the Gemara says, Haki nami kamar. Talmud Lomar Ba. So both say you're right. From the fact that it says ve'edein ba, that's where I learn out that it's only tuma where you could go ahead and use an eid echad. But for all the other stages, one is going to require legitimate eidos. Right? The Gemara says, so hachinam kama Talmud Lomar Ba v'lo b'kinoi ba v'lo b'stira. Ultimately, the edein ba teaches me that halacha l'maisa, although an eid echad will work for tuma, it will not work for kinui, warning, nor will it work for stira. So which one? V'tuma ba'alma below kinui ubelow stira dilo mehem and eid echad minalan. We'll say, but how do I know? Fine. So we'll say, so just want to point out what we've established so far, which is kind of things we've already established beforehand. That ultimately, again, what is going to be unique concerning tuma is that tuma you can utilize in eid echad. But for kinui and for stira, ultimately, again, one is going to have to utilize basic eidos made up of two witnesses. Now the Gemara asks something very interesting. V'tuma ba'alma below kinui below stira below mehem and eid echad minalan. They will say, what about? This is actually fascinating. What about a case of tuma that was not preceded by kinui and stira? What would happen? So the Gemara presupposes an eid echad in that case would not do anything. So I'll say, let me just describe what this is. So imagine for a moment, you have an eid echad who shows up and says, you know what? Rachel's married to Ruvain. That's not what the eid echad is saying. We know Rachel's married to Ruvain. And then one day an eid echad rolls in and he says, by the way, I saw Rachel having relations with Shimon. So I'll say, so what's unique about this case? In this case over here, the eid echad by Tumah is not preceded by what? Not preceded by by kinui and stira. By kinui and stira. So how do I know, says the Gemara, that if an eid echad comes along and testifies that Rachel was mizana, that he's not believed? That eid echad is meaningless. How do I know that? So ne'emar kan ki matzah ba ervas davar v'ne'emar lahalon api shnayim edim o shlosha edim yakum davar ma davra amar lahalon edim shnayim afkan edim shnayim. Because Rabbi say, listen to this. What the Gemara essentially says is as follows. The concept that an eid echad is believed by Tumah is something unique in the context of kinui and stira, and it makes sense, right? Why does it make sense? Because Rabbi say again, what's the term we keep using over and over again? Raglayim l'dover. So if there's kinui and there's stira, and now you have an eid echad who shows up and says, by the way, there was Tumah, that's the case where we will go ahead and believe in eid echad. But if an eid echad just rolls up and goes ahead and gives eidos that Rachel was mezaneh, so we'll say, so then again, not in the context of kinui and stira, then such an eid echad will not be believed. Because without kinui and stira, then we're just in the regular world of eidos. And in the regular world of eidos, what do you need in order to establish legitimate testimony? What do you need? Shnei edim, davar, right? Davar. It's just a fascinating halacha. Good. Tarabanan. Where goes weiter? Ezu eidos harishona. So what's the matter when we see eidos rishona, eidos achrona? What is the eidos harishona? Zu eidos stira. In this context, I will say eidos rishona refers to the eidos that Rachel was alone with Shimon, whom her husband Reuven warned her about. What's eidos achrona? What does that refer to? Zu eidos tuma. This refers ultimately again to eidos regarding the fact that Rachel was not only alone, but rather again that she actually had relations with Shimon. Top of Daled. So we'll see, now we get, this is actually very interesting. The Kama Shir Stira, right? Now let's delve into the details. So we'll say, here's what we know. We know that there's a concept of a warning, where Reuven says to his wife Rachel, do not be alone with Shimon. And then if she violates the warning and she is alone with Shimon, Stira, ultimately that triggers the Sotah process. Now asks the Gemara, how long does she have to be secluded with Shimon in order to trigger the Sotah process? To which the Gemara says, Kedei Tumah. Enough time for something immoral to have occurred. Right? Rabbi say, how long is Kedei Tumah? Kedei Biyah. Enough time for relations. Kedei Hara. So we'll say, we'll talk about this, but Kedei Hara means essentially the beginning of relations. Now, how halacha is going to define the beginning of relations? It's going to be something that's quite interesting. So Kedei Hara could mean a number of different things, as we'll discuss. It can mean the amount of time for initial penetration, or it could also mean just the amount of time for physical contact. Again, we'll discuss all of this. The Gemara gives other shiurim. Kedei hakafas dekel. the amount of time it takes to walk around the palm tree. Div Rabbi Shmuel. Okay. Rabbi Eliezer says it's the amount of time that it takes to dilute a glass of wine. Remember, again, we've seen this many times already, that halacha l'maisa, they used to have like wine concentrate. And if you wanted to go ahead and have a glass of wine, what would you do? Take a little bit of glass of wine concentrate and dilute it. So that's the amount. Again, these are all just different shiurim for what we'll call the shiur of stira. Stira, in other words, Rachel has to be alone with Shimon long enough for something to have occurred. So the fundamental shaila is, how long is that? How long is that? And that's all these different shiurim. Rabbi Yehoshua says, Kedei lishtoso, not the amount of time to dilute the glass of wine, but rather what? The amount of time to drink the glass of wine. Ben Azai says, Kedei litzlos beitza, the amount of time it takes to roast an egg. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Kedei legoma, the amount of time it takes to swallow an egg. Rabbi Yehuda Mesera Omer, Kedei legmoa shalosh beitzim, the amount of time it takes to swallow 3 eggs. Right? B'zuachazu, one after the other. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yirmiyah Omer, Kedei likshar gardenima. This is very interesting. I would say if a person is a weaver and the string, the thread breaks or rips, the amount of time it takes to retie the 2 pieces of thread to each other. Chanin ben Pinchas Omer, Kedei shetoshit yad l'soch biyah, litol kisam. Chanin ben Pinchas says the amount of time that it would take the woman to put her hand into her mouth in order to remove something that got stuck between her teeth. Right? Plimo Omer Kedei shetoshit yad l'sal, litol kikar. So Plimo says the amount of time that it would take her to go ahead and put her hand into a basket in order to remove a loaf of bread. And even up in his last one, the Gemara wants to bring Plimo wants to bring a scriptural allusion. What's the scriptural allusion? Ki ba'ad isha zona ad kikar lechem. So I will say again, he's quoting over here, all that's happening in that pasuk is that the pasuk itself is comparing a loaf of bread ultimately again to an immoral woman. Okay, we're actually going to dash in that pasuk a little bit later. Fine. The chol hani lamali. I will say, here's what's interesting. Why do I need all of these shiurim? In other words, why don't you just say the amount of stira, right? How long does stira have to be in order to trigger the Sotah process? Enough time for something to have occurred. That's it. Why are you getting into all this? To which the Gemara says, Tzrichi, di tana kedei tuma. See, here's what's interesting. Because the Gemara could have just said kedei tuma, which sounds like the amount of time it takes for an act of relations to occur. Havamina, kedei tuma, va'artzusa. I would have thought again that what does kedei tuma include? It includes the amount of time for the act itself of biyah. But maybe you say artzusa is like the seduction. So maybe it's not just the act of biyah, but maybe ultimately it's the lead up as well. Kamash malon kedei biyah. Therefore, I will say all of these shiurim are trying to come about to give us a more precise time frame to understand that the shiur for stira is in fact only the act itself and not anything prior to the act. So the itana kedei biyah, if we just say kedei biyah, havamina kedei gimar biyah. I would have thought about saying, what does biyah mean? Biyah means the entire act from beginning to end. Kamash malon kedei hara. Therefore, the Gemara gives these opinions kedei hara, which means the initial part of biyah. Now, what that means, again, contact or penetration. So that in of itself is going to be a machlokus. But what it means is, it doesn't have to be the entire amount of time for a complete act of biyah. V'yashmini kedei hara, and it would just say kedei hara, havamini kedei hara v'artzusa. I would have thought again, perhaps that means initial penetration, but also the seduction that comes before it. Kamash malan kedei tuma. Therefore, we'll say again, the Gemara wants to just give us this idea that it really, the amount of stira, if you think about it, is really just a very small, it doesn't have to be a very long time. In other words, it's a relatively small amount of time, because really, it's really just this initial beginning of the biyah. That's just enough time for stira to have occurred and for the Sotah process to be triggered. The kama hara, I will say, how long is hara? K'dia kafas dekel, the amount of time it takes to walk around the palm tree. Okay? So we'll say, the kash, or minni, the nistara, the kama shir stira. We'll say, it's another Bryna. When the pasuk says, v'nistara, that she is alone with the man that she was warned about, how long is the shir stira? Lo shamanu. I'm sorry. The kama shir stira lo shamanu. So we'll say in general, what's interesting is Torah says that she's secluded with this man. How long? Well, fascinatingly enough, the Torah doesn't actually give us a shir. Listen to this. Kishu Omer. V'hinitma, that she was defiled. So we'll say, so remember again, that means bia. We'll say first wide line, Dalet Amud Aleph, Havi Omer, Kedei Tuma, Kedei bia, Kedei Hara, Kedei Chazaras Dekel, Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. So what Rabbi Eliezer says, once it says V'hinitma, that means seclusion has to be long enough for some type of defilement to occur. That's the amount of time for bia. That's the amount of time of hara. And if you just want to quantify that, the amount of time it takes to walk around the palm tree. Fine, that's Rabbi Eliezer. Yeshua says, Kedei meziga sakos. The amount, so we'll say, so we're going to go through this again. The amount of time it takes to dilute a cup of wine. Benazai Omer Kedei l'shtoso. The amount of time it takes to drink the wine. Rabbi Kiva Omer Kedei litzlos beisa. The amount of time it takes to roast an egg. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer Kedei l'goma, to swallow the egg. So the Gemara says, 1 second. Chasar daitcha hainu akafas dekel hainu chazaras dekel. So we'll say, here's what's interesting. Right, what's interesting is there's two different wordings that's used over here. Rabbi Eliezer used the phrase chazaras dekel. Now I will say b'pashtus, what chazaras dekel means according to Rashi is the amount of time that it takes when the wind blows the palm tree for the palm tree to come back into place. Right? So we have chazaras dekel and we have hakafas dekel. You know what's interesting about this is, we over time, Jews, we've become like such urban dwellers. So when we hear stuff like this, like, I didn't know palm trees blow in the wind, right? That's interesting. In other words, the amount of time it takes, how long does it take to walk around the palm tree? Right? So it's just fascinating. Again, so obviously it's reflecting obviously a much more, bucolic type of lifestyle, which was just much more embedded in nature. So again, some of these things were just like second nature to them, whereas for us it sounds a little bit strange in any event. So we're assuming now that chazaras dekel and hakafas dekel are the same thing, to which the Gemara says, Hasam Amar Bishma Kedei Hakafas Dekel Upalig Rabbi Eliezer Alei. Supposed to listen to this. Beforehand, Rabbi Shmuel said the amount of time it takes to walk around the palm tree, and Rabbi Eliezer was arguing on him. Hacha Rabbi Eliezer Kedei Chazaras Dekel, and here Rabbi Eliezer himself is saying Chazaras Dekel, to which the Gemara says, Amar Abaye Hakafa Beregel Chazara Beruach. The truth is, they're really the same shiur. They're just referring to two different things. Hakafa, obviously again, walking around means you're walking around on foot. Chazara, as we just said before, means the amount of time it takes that when the wind blows the palm tree, for the palm tree to come back. But in reality, they're a similar shiur. By Rav Ashi, Chazara beruach, so let's listen to this. When we speak about the blowing of the palm tree and then it coming back into place, what does that mean? Chazar beruach kihechi da'azl v'hadr asi? Does it mean odilma kihechi da'azl v'asi v'hadr kai biduchtei? Does it mean ultimately again just swaying to and fro, or does it mean swaying and then coming back to rest in its original position? To which the Gemara says, teku. Okay. Hasam amra belezer kidei miziga sakos. So we'll say before Rabbi Eliezer said the amount of time that it takes to dilute a cup of wine, hacha kedei chazaras dekel, and here in this price he's saying the amount of time it takes for the palm tree to blow back into place. So we'll say, so which one is it? Which says it's not a contract, it's not a kasha. Idi chat shiuru. It's actually one amount, one shiur. So we'll say now what we're going to do, you're going to see is what we're going to do is we're going to take a lot of these opinions, we're going to consolidate them and recognize that in fact a lot of these things are actually talking about the same amount of time, just different expressions. So first, some of the eight. So the Gemara says as follows. Hasam Amr Yehoshua Kedei Lishtoso Hacha Amr Kedei Meziga Sakos. Before Rabbi Yehoshua said the amount of time it takes to drink the cup of wine, here he said the amount of time it takes to dilute it. So the Gemara says Ema Kedei Limzog V'Lishtos. Maybe he meant to say the amount of time that it takes to dilute and drink. V'Leima Idi V'Idi Chat Shihuruhu. But why don't you just say maybe it's just two expressions of the same shiur? In other words, maybe the amount of time it takes to drink a cup of wine, the amount of time it takes to dilute the wine is one shiur. If that's the case, Hainu Rabbi Eliezer. If that's the case, he's saying the same thing as Rabbi Eliezer. Hasam Rabbi Nazai Kedei Litzlo space. So before Rabbi Nazai said the amount of time it takes to roast an egg. Ha'chama Kedei Lishtoso. Here he says the amount of time it takes to drink. Idi V'Idi Chat Shiuru. In reality, again, it's the same shiur. Fine. Hasam Am Rabbi Akiva Kedei Legoma. Hacha Amar Kedei Litzlos Beisa. But when Rabbi Akiva said the amount of time it takes to swallow an egg, here he says the amount of time that it takes to roast it. Ema Kedei Litzlos Beisa Ulagoma. What Rabbi Akiva meant to say is it's the amount of time that it takes to what? To roast it and to swallow it. Maybe it's all one shiur. Imkain Hainu ben Azai. Sorry, in other words, maybe both of those things are the same shear. If that's the case, then Rabbi Akiva is not really differentiating himself from the position of Ben Azai. In the first place, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira said it's the amount that Tumah is the amount of time ultimately it takes to swallow 3 eggs consecutively. Here he says in order to swallow. Rabbi Akiva Kamar. So he was answering up Rabbi Akiva. So ultimately, again, because Rabbi Akiva was saying that it's both the roasting and the swallowing. Why don't we just say ultimately again that the shear of Gemia is its own shear? Fine. So we'll say, so Lamaisa again, just to consolidate and to simplify, here's what we know. We know again, just to track our process. First step in the Sotah process, kinoi. Let's go with the assumption right now, like the Rambam does, not the assumption, as the Rambam paskins. So kinoi is going to require 2 eidim. After she violates the eidos, she violates the kinoi, and ultimately then there's stira. So again, stira is only problematic if what? What have we just established? If she's alone, kidei tuma. Kidei tuma. Now we'll say, what is the shear of tuma, right? So here we go, right? So we'll say, if we want to consolidate, essentially the shear of tuma is enough time for at least the initial stage of bia to occur. And again, it's only the small amount of time for the initiation of the actual physical act itself, not anything that precedes it, nor does it have to be the amount of time for a complete act of bia to occur. And all of these different opinions are just trying to quantify this amount of time. Beautiful. We're not finished yet. Rabbi Elazar ben Yirmiyah Omer, Kedei Shik Shagad Dinema. So as Rabbi Elazar ben Yirmiyah said, that Kedei Tumah is the amount of time that if his thread broke, the amount of time that it takes to tie the 2 pieces back together. By Rav Ashi, the merchak or the mikrav. So again, are we talking about a case where the 2 pieces of thread were distant or are close to each other, right? If you're a weaver, and the thread breaks, now you have to go and tie it together. So we'll say, there's the act of tying it together, but what else is there? There's the act of getting the 2 disparate pieces and tying them and bringing them together. So we'll say, so what are you talking about? The 2 ends of the thread, are they far apart or are they close? To which the Gemara says, Teku. Ultimately, again, the Gemara leaves this question open. Plimo Omer Kadesh Toshit Yad Lasal Lital Kikar. Plimo said the amount of time that it takes her to put her hand in the basket and take out a loaf of bread. So by Rav Ashi, Demahadik or Delamahadik. So I will say, so number 1, did I skip? Sorry. Chanim ben Pinchas Omer Kadesh Toshit Yad Lasoch Pia Lital Kisam. So Chanim ben Pinchas said the amount of time that it takes her to put her hand into her mouth. Literally, you both say to remove like a splinter, to remove something from her mouth. So by Rav Ashi, Dimahadik or Delamahadik. We're talking about when the item that she's removing is embedded in her mouth or not embedded in her mouth. To which the guy is supposed to say, obviously, if it's embedded, it's going to take more time. Not embedded, it's going to take less time. Tegu. Plima Omer Kadesh Toshi Jajal Salitol Kigar. So Plima said the amount of time that it takes her to put her hand into the basket to extract a loaf of bread. So by Rav Ashi, Dimahadik or Delamahadik. What's the story with the bread? Right? Is the loaf of bread? Is the loaf of bread ultimately again right, stuck in the basket or not stuck in the basket? Bechadita o ba'atika. Is it a new basket or an old basket? So Rashi points out what's the chiluk between a new basket and an old basket. So he says an old basket is already broken in. A new basket will often have the image is the basket they're using is like one that's made out of reeds. So in a new basket you still have like reed splinters that are sticking up. Because of that, it impedes, right? It takes a little bit more time to pull something out of the basket because the item gets stuck on the splinters that are extending. So a new basket or an old basket? Bechamima or bikarira? Are we talking about a warm loaf or a cold loaf? A warm loaf, you have to be much more careful when taking it out because you don't want it to crumble. We'll say Amin Beis, bidechiti or bidisari. Ultimately, again, is it a barley loaf? Or ultimately, again, a wheat loaf. So Rashi again points out, Shalchitin chalak v'nishmat yosem shal. Apparently, wheat loaves are smoother than barley loaves, so they can slip out of the hand easier. Birikika or ba'akusha. Is it a soft loaf, right? Or is it a hard loaf? To which the Gemara says, Teku. Okay, so we'll say, so obviously, again, there are these variables that exist. I'm Rabbi Yosef, I'm Rabbi Yochanan. Kolecha be'echas is very interesting. I will say, see, now the Gemara asks, essentially, it's fascinating to see, right? Let's be clear. Obviously, there's a distinction in these shiurim, right? Because if there wasn't a distinction in the shiurim, then what? We wouldn't be having this conversation. Right? So obviously, again, when this one says, Kedei chazaras dakal, and this one says, Kedei ligmoa beitzim, and this one says, Kedei meziga asakos, Kedei shtia asakos, obviously, there's a machlokes, because if there's not a machlokes, in other words, we don't need so many opinions to illustrate the same shiur, to say the same amount of time. So what's this fascinating? So therefore, again, Rabbi Yisrael and Rabbi Yosef call echad ve'echad ba'atzmo shiur. We'll say each one of these opinions, ultimately, again, was basing the shiur based on his own experience. Rashi says over here, ba'atzmo shiur, kama shahayashah bebiyaso. So these are all married men. So therefore, again, the Gemara is saying they came up with the shiur of Kedei Bia, of Kedei Tuma, based on their own experiences. So I said, this is fascinating. Really? Va'ika ben Azai, Dilo Nasib. But 1 second. Ben Azai is in this conversation, and Ben Azai himself never married. Now I will say, take a quick look at Rashi. Last wide line in Rashi, Va'ika ben Azai Dilo Nasib. Kidamar b'Yevamos. Supposed to remember this. Ava ma'aseh shenafshi chashka batorah. So I will say, remember again, Ben Azai was this incredible personality who said that nafshi chashka batorah. I already have a love of my life. And the truth is, I have no more love to give, right? I have no more attention to give because all I want is Torah. And essentially, marrying someone would go ahead and deprive that person of the real affection that I have that's totally tied up in Torah. So ultimately, again, so Ben Azai is commenting on this, yet he has no first-hand experience, to which the Gemara says, Ibais ema nasif upirish ava. So first of all, remember, the Gemara Tosas in Yevamos brings down that Ben Azai did get married. Who did Ben Azai marry? Who did he marry? Rabbi Akiva's daughter. The daughter of Rachel, right? Ultimately, again, so he was married and then he separated. So whether separated means that ultimately, again, he got divorced, or just that, whatever, he didn't live with his wife. But the possibility one is he did get married. Possibility to be by Sema was that when Ben Azai gives his shiur ultimately again is based on got from his rabbi, or by Sema was incredible. Sotah Hashem liyireyav. But the other possibility is the secrets of HaKadosh Baruch Hu are conveyed to those who revere Him. I was saying there's a concept ultimately again that when a person is embedded in Torah, there's just certain things they understand. I will say, there's a term that's often used today that I think is sometimes not fully understood. The concept of Das Torah. I will say, what's Das Torah? Das Torah is a concept that says that when a person lives a life that is totally shakua, that is totally immersed in Torah, that they have an understanding of the world that is just a different kind of understanding. And that's why not every person, right? Person could be a Talmid Chacham, but they don't have Das Torah. Right? Just like a person could be a rabbi and they don't have Das Torah. Right? In other words, Das Torah is this concept that let me give you this on a simple level. Let's say, how do you feel after you finish Daf Yomi? Right? How do you feel after you finish a Blat Gemara? Right? You feel great. But what else? There's a clarity, right? I always find the clearest moments of the day is right when you finish the Blat Gemara. You finish learning. You see the world with a certain level of clarity. You see yourself with a certain level of clarity. The problem is, then you walk out, right? And that's when everything just turned upside down. But it's the most beautiful part about Torah, right? The most beautiful part about Torah is that when I finish learning, the world makes sense to me. I make sense to me. I have a sense of clarity. That clarity, that's like a tipa shebetipa. That's like a little piece of what it means to have Das Torah. So Das Torah is a person who is embedded in Torah. A person, again, who's living a life that is constantly immersed in Torah, has a life clarity and sees the world through different lenses. And they're able to understand things that the truth is sometimes the rest of us cannot. So the Gemara suggests maybe Ben Azai just knew stuff. He just knew stuff. How do you just know stuff? So Hashem liyireyav. Because sometimes the secrets of the world, the secrets of life, the secrets to meaningful living are given over to those who embed themselves in a lifestyle of Torah. It's an incredible idea. Darsha Avira. So let's listen to this. So Darsha Avira. Zimnin Amarli Mishmeid Rabbi Ami. Zimnin Amarli Mishmeid Rabbi Asi. So let's listen to this. Rabbi Avira Darshan. Rabbi says incredible Gemara. Kala Ochel Lechem Belo Netilas Yadayim Kiluba Al Isha Zona. So this is pretty wild, right? Whoever eats bread without washing, Rabbi says he's talking about Al Netilas Yadayim, right? He's talking about ritual washing. Whoever eats bread without netilas yadayim, it's as if he committed adultery. Okay, so the Gemara says, Shne'emar ki ba'ad isha zona ad kikar lechem. So according to the pasuk in Mishlei, now all the Gemara is doing over here is just noting the juxtaposition between isha zona, right? So by the way, in this context, isha zona doesn't just have to mean like a harlot, like a prostitute, but isha zona means any woman who's not permitted to you. Right, so ba'ad isha zona ad kikar lechem. So if the way the Gemara is darshaning it is, if you do not take the proper measures and proper steps to consume your kikar lechem b'kedusha b'tara, it's as if you're having relations with a married woman. Right? I'm sorry, isha zona. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabba, if that's the case, someone say before we go on, what is this? Right? You want to tell me it's bad to eat without netilas yadayim? I got it. But literally again, that a person who goes ahead and eats bread without netilas yadayim is as if he's having relations with the zona. You both say, look at the Tosfos Shans. So, okay, we're going to try this. Let's take back to my rush days. Right? You both say, Tosfos Shans is on the right-hand margin. Right-hand margin. Do you have it on the right-hand margin? Okay, so far so good. So I'll say, 5 lines in. Good. Excellent. So it tells the Shans. So look what he says. Kala ocha lechem below netilas yadayim kilu bal isha zona shneimar ki ba'ad isha zona ad kikar lechem perish. It's perish. Darish le miseifa l'reisha b'shel kikar lechem mischayim ba'onesh shel isha zona ulahachi midamela leisha zona mishum tekesha ocha below netila havi achila hefker v'zona zu mifmaf keresi. So I say it's such a beautiful pshat. So I say, what's the whole chap of brachas before we eat? Why do I have to make a bracha before I eat? To show that ultimately, again, this bread belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I'm taking it from Hashem, but the only way I'm able to take it is ultimately if I recognize who the owner is. That's the whole yisod. So I'm going to go ahead, and before I eat, and before I consume anything, I say, Ribono Shel Olam, this is your bread. This is your bread. I'm asking you for permission to go ahead and eat it. I see your beauty, your kiddusha, your incredible kite. I see it in this loaf of bread. So I also watch this. So if you go ahead and you just eat bread, if I eat bread without netilas yadayim, without the proper preparations, then essentially it's making the bread like it's hefker, like it's ownerless. So I'll say that's like an isha zona. Who's an isha zona? What's an isha zona? She's mufkeres. She's hefker for everyone, right? She's hefker, right? She's not tied down. She's not committed to any relationship. It's hefker. So a person who goes ahead and eats bread without netilas yadayim, that's a consumption of hefkerus, right? It's ownerless. It's nothingness. It's just out there. So a person who takes that approach to the bread, it's like he's having relations with an isha zona, hefkerus. So we'll say, so like it's a different. Here. Let's say, because I just want to point out something interesting. We'll say, what? Okay, it's going to sound strange, but if you think about it, what's the prohibition of relations with an isha zona, right? It's only allowed. Now again, I'm not. When I say only allowed, in other words, it's not like adultery, and it's not like other arayos, which carry with them a chi of misa. A man goes to a zona. I want to go on record against it, right? Right? But it shouldn't be any, right? Against it. But lemaisa. What's the prohibition? Assuming there's no ashchas zera, things like, okay. So it's a lav. It's an inappropriate thing to do. Contrast that again with all the other forbidden relationships. There's an isra misa. So also, what the Gemara is saying over here is, you eat bread without netilas yadayim. It's like going to an isha zona. You're living a life of hefkerus, right? Again, that bread belongs to someone. So similarly to the Ribono Shel Olam. So there's a process. There's a process for redeeming it from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You bypass that process, That's a life that have kerus. Just like going to an Isha zone. Incredible. Problem the Gemara says is, Amarava, the pasuk then should be written differently. It should say, Hai ba'ad Isha zona ad kikar lechem, ba'ad kikar lechem ad Isha zona mibayle. If that's the case, it should put the bread before the Isha zona. Right? Because then the drasha is, if you eat bread without netilas yadayim, it's as if you've gone to an Isha zona. And the Amarava, therefore, Rava says, no, it means it's something different. Kalabal Isha zona, l'sof mefakesh kikar lechem. We'll say what it means is, what the pasuk means to say is, if a person goes ahead and goes to an Isha zona, at the end of the day, he's going to be begging for bread. I will say, what's the pshat? What's the pshat? A very simple idea. When a person loses themselves in immorality, the pursuit of immorality can become totally all-consuming to the point that what? That a person loses sight of all of their other responsibilities. We'll say, we see this all the time. No, we see this all the time. And it's one of the biggest like, Musar Haskell is you can get, like, people make the most overwhelming and terrible life mistakes for the satisfaction of some type of carnal desire. And as my Simba Choyom, people throw away everything. They throw away everything because of temptation. Do we understand the temptation? Of course, we're human beings. We all understand the temptation. But the whole chap in life is to try to kind of do like that cost-benefit analysis. Sure, I want to satisfy this urge, but what is it going to cost me? And is that cost, is that loss worth satisfying that desire? So the Gemara says the person who becomes embedded in a lifestyle of immorality, the person who goes after the Isha Zona just represents just giving in to all of the immoral urges and wants and lusts in life. Just understand, if you sign up for that lifestyle, it's going to eclipse it's going to eclipse everything else. You're going to lose sight of everything else to the point you're not going to take care of your mishpacha, you're not going to take care of your parnasa, and ultimately, again, it'll end up leaving you begging for bread. It's incredible. The Gemara goes weiter. What's another incredible Gemara? Rabbi says, so whoever goes ahead and live a mizalzel ben tezdayim. So mizalzel ben tezdayim means you don't wash before you eat. You don't wash for bread. What's going to end up happening? Ne'ekar min ha'olam. So I'll say, also very interesting. What is ne'ekar min ha'olam? Again, we assume ne'ekar min ha'olam means you die, right? Which once again seems a bit hyperbolic. So because I understand not washing your tezdayim is certainly not good, but because I don't wash the tezdayim, suddenly again I'm going to die. Ne'ekar min ha'olam. So we'll say, so perhaps what it means is like this. Remember, if you don't wash your hands, so we'll say, what does that really represent? That you don't understand the Seder with which the world runs. You don't understand there's a Seder, there's an order. What's the order? The Ribbon Shalom provides me with things, and I'm allowed to partake of them as long as what? I recognize who it comes from and I express my gratitude. If the failure to wash before you eat bread represents an uprooting of that Seder, an uprooting of that order. You know what I'm saying? A person who doesn't live life with a proper Seder, ne'ekar min ha'olam. Ne'ekar min ha'olam doesn't mean you're going to die. Ne'ekar min ha'olam means you are uprooted from successful. You will say, the key to successful living is Seder. Somebody said it. Who said it at the Siyum? Said at the Siyum, maybe it was Larry Franks, that the Iker of Daf Yomi is the Yomi. Is the Yomi. Gedalia? Ah, good, all right. Gedalia. Right? Most beautiful thing, right? The ikr of, right? It's the Seder. Right? So a person who's mizalzel in the Tilas Adayim means, I'm not a person of Seder. There's a Seder. How do you eat bread? How does a Yid eat bread? A Yid washes his hands, makes the bracha al Tilas Adayim, says Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. That's the Seder. Well, if you don't have Seder in that, probably means you don't have Seder and a lot of other stuff in life. And if you don't have Seder, ne'ekar min ha'olam. Ultimately, again, you're not going to die, but you are going to be uprooted and totally detached from any type of meaningful and successful living. Successful, productive life requires Seder in every single area. The Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, we're making such good time until I got to these Gemaras. Okay, fine. Let's get ready for this. So interesting halach over here. This is why I told you Sotah. Sotah is the most incredible masechtos because on every single daf, almost every single daf, there's incredible halacha, incredible hashkafa, incredible agadata, all there. So Mayim Rishonim. What's the interesting halacha? Mayim Rishonim, a person goes ahead and washes. Right? Mayim Rishonim refers to washing before you eat bread. After you wash, you're supposed to lift your hands up. Supposed to lift your hands up. Mayim Achronim, Mayim Achronim, you keep your hands pointed down. So Rashi points out over here the fundamental distinction between the two. Is because we'll say what we are concerned about ultimately again with Mayim Rishonim is that if you hold your hands down, some of the water, remember again, the way it works with Mayim Rishonim is first washing is to remove, first, in other words, we're washing twice on each hand. First, right, two. First washing is to go ahead and remove the tumah. Second washing is to remove the water. The concern is that if you hold your hands down, some of the water may go past the wrist and then come back down and remitame the hands. That's why we go ahead and hold the hands up. It's interesting. The Mishnah Berurah quotes that some have the custom to say, Su'u yedechem kodesh ubarchu es Hashem. The Mishnah Berurah himself doesn't like that minhag. He feels that it's a potential hefsek. But again, it is a minhag. So if you happen to have that minhag, you see like by the Hasidim and by the Sfardim who have this. So again, if you do it, fantastic. If you don't do it, this is not the thing to take on, right? Yeah, there are other things to take on in Miras Hashem, but just interesting. But the idea is Su'u Yidechem Kodesh, right? Lift up your hands. Mayim Achronim on the other, we'll say, why do we wash Mayim Achronim? Well, at least the original concept of Mayim Achronim is because of Melech's Domis, this sodomite salt, which was so powerful that Chesed caused blindness. So this way you hold the hands down so that the water should just trickle to the ground and not rub your eyes with it. Okay, good. Person washes his hands, he has to lift his hands up. Out of concern that maybe, again, by Mayim Rishonim, the water will go past the wrist. And then we'll come back and be mitam with the hands. I'm Rabbi Yevamos. Whoever goes ahead and eats bread without first properly drying his hands, it's as if he's eating impure bread. Oh my! So we'll say. So again, that's just, by the way, it doesn't even have to be anything esoteric there. That's just out of concern that lamais, again, perhaps some of the water was rimatam in the hands, and now you're bringing that to the loaf of bread. Okay. So the Gemara says, "My ve'ishes ish nefesh shikara tatzud." So we'll say, what's the meaning of the pasuk in Mishlei? Same pasuk of Kiba'ad Isha Zora Giga Lechem says ve'ishes ish nefesh shikara tatzud. A married woman sometimes could ensnare a precious soul. What is this? What does this refer to? I'm Rabbi Chiba Abba, I'm Rabbi Yochanan. We'll say this is wild. Kol Adam Shish Bogasas Haruach Lebasof Nichshal Ve'eshes Ish. A person who is arrogant ultimately is going to come to commit adultery. Shneimar Ve'eshes Ish Nefesh Yikara Tatzah. So we'll say, how does the Gemara sing that in the pasuk? In this context, Yikara is referring to arrogance. The arrogant person ultimately, again, will chas v'shalom come to go ahead and commit adultery. We'll say, what's the pshat? So the truth is, it's incredibly profound. We'll say, what's the chap with arrogance? When a person is arrogant, right? Everything is about me. And everything is about my comfort and my happiness and my pleasure. Well, if everything becomes about me, then it doesn't matter the impact that my indulgences have on anyone or anything else. A person like that knows indulgence with no limitations, indulgence with no boundaries, because everything is just about the satisfaction of my pleasure. If everything is just about the satisfaction, right, of me, then by definition, of course, the person is going to trespass into the world of the prohibited as well. So Gemara goes back to Rava says that that's the case. Hi nefesh shikara nefesh gavami baile. Why does it use lashon of nefesh shikara? It just say nefesh gavoa, which is a better way to say arrogant. V'od hi tatzud mi baile. Allah Amar Rava. Here we go. Rava says into this. Kalaba al ishes ish. The means to say is like this: any man who commits adultery, first white line about I feel lama Torah. Even if a person learned a lot of Torah, dichsiv ba yikarihi mipninim. Right? Even if such a person learned a lot of Torah, where again by Torah it said it's more precious than pearls. Mikohen gadol shenichnas lefnayel v'lefnim. even from the Kohen Gadol who goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So the Gemara says, Hi titzudenu, ultimately this sin will ensnare him, ledina shel Gehenna. So Rabbi say, what the Gemara essentially is saying is like this. There are certain averos which are very hard to rebound from. And it was, if you remember again, like the Gemara Masechtos Brachos brings this down on the pasuk in Kalas, Mu'uvas lo yuchal liskon v'chesron lo yuchal limanos. Something that is bent or something that is crooked cannot be made straight. So the Gemara gives, what's an example of that? So that's someone who engaged in an illicit relationship and birthed the mamzer. I will say, what's the problem now? What's the problem? The problem is there is an irreversible consequence of my actions. You know, it's like, we have like this incredible dialectic in Yiddishkeit, which is, on one hand we say, there is no avera from which you cannot recover. Right? Like Rabbi Nachman says, Ein shum yesh ba'olam klal. There's no such thing as a Jew saying, I'm done, I'm broken, I can't. That's always true. At the same time, what's also true? There are some things we do in life that cause irreparable damage. So I'll say, how do you reconcile? I'll give you a good mashal, right? I'll give you a good mashal. You ever have, this happens all the time. We'll just keep this between us, right? And whoever watches this on YouTube and the podcast and Spotify, right? So listen to this. You ever have like a very like a serious argument with your spouse, a serious argument with your wife, right? And let's say it was one of those rare occasions that you were wrong, right? I was wrong. I did it. So what do I do? I apologize, and like it's one of those like heartfelt apologies, right? Maybe like a little moisture in the corner of the eye, like really like I really genuinely feel bad, right? I do it. I must say it's an incredible thing. What are you expecting in the aftermath of that apology? Right? We're good, right? Like we're good. Everything, right? I'm expecting. Let's get on with our day. Right? You know, and everything. And then what? I'm sorry. It does. And then what happens? Like I was like, okay, yeah, okay. And I'm like, but why aren't you acting normal? Like you know, why are you still upset? Why are you still this? And it's such an incredible thing. Because what we don't realize is that sometimes when traumatic things occur, things don't simply just bounce back to what they were. There's a trauma, and sometimes there's breakage. And that breakage, so we'll say, it's an incredible thing. So on one hand, can you do tshuva for any avera? Absolutely. Tshuva is always possible, no matter how terrible the event may be. That being said, there is sometimes fallout and consequences from the things that we do that cannot simply be immediately erased. So that's true with the mamzer. And the Rabbi gives another example of that, is adultery. Ish is ish. And we'll say, and it makes sense, because what happens? A person, chas v'shalom, commits adultery. So what's happened over here? It's not just the pshat. We'll say, you know, if I go home, right, and I eat chazer, right, or I go home and I wear shatnez, or so again, that's between me and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The problem with adultery, Rabbi says, what's happened over here? It's not just me. Who else is it? It's another human being. And by the way, it's her husband, and it's my wife, and it's her kids, and my kid. And suddenly, again, there's like a dramatic ripple effect over here. So, okay, I could do tshuva. I could say, Hashamnu, Bagamnu, I could do tshuva. And I could really, repair this between me and God. The problem is, there's all of this other fallout that I often get. I will say, when you think about Avera in general in this way, it's not just by adultery. There are so many, the power of hate is sometimes the unintended ripple effects. I didn't mean the ripple effects. I just wanted to kind of indulge in something. I just wanted to satisfy a want. And suddenly I realized in the aftermath of the act, there are so many other ripple effects that happen. And often what's incredible is, even after I do tshuva, I can't dial back. I can't take back all of the unintended consequences. So therefore, again, the Gemara says over here, can a person do tshuva for adultery? Of course, a person could do tshuva for anything. But just understand, there are effects of that act that you can't get the genie back in the bottle, right? In other words, once you've committed the act, the unintended consequences cannot be dialed back. Incredible. Incredible. Any person who's arrogant, it's as if he worshipped idolatry. It says over here, abomination of Hashem, Gvalid, which is arrogant. So we'll say it's incredible. So we'll say, what's the pshat? It makes perfect sense. Because what's idolatry? Idolatry ultimately, again, is an abandonment of all that is good. A person who's arrogant loses sense of anything but themselves. Again, we're going to talk a lot more about gaiva. Let's just go quickly. We just have a few more minutes. So the Gemara says this: incredible. A person who's a bal gaiva, it's as if literally, again, he doesn't believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But you're going to both say, what's the logic in that? The logic in that is simple. When a person is arrogant, there is no room in their life and no room in their heart for anyone other than themselves. Not even for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not even for a spouse, not even for children. Everything becomes about me. Wild. Right? Person who's a Baal Gaiva, it's as if he had relations with every single one of the Arayas. He has called to Avosayel. So we'll say use the same notion of to'iva, abomination, by immorality and by arrogance. So we'll say it makes, again, what's the logic? The logic is when a person chas v'shalom suffers from arrogance, so again, all they're consumed by is themselves, and as such, there's no room, there's no bandwidth for any good, for any type of growth. And therefore, by definition, a person is setting themselves up for dramatic life failure. Ula amar kilu bana bama. It's if a person built a bama. Shnei amar chadu lachem ina adama sheneshon la'apo ki bama or ki bima nechshahu. Al tikrei bima ela bama. So both is very profound, right? A person is a Baal Gaiva. This is if they brought the one. Both say, what's a bama? What's a bama? A bama is a personal altar. Personal altar, right? So we'll say it's incredible. You know when a person is a Baal Gaiva, you know what it's like? They built a bama. By the way, who did they build the bama to? Themselves. So I will say arrogance is the worship of the self. Arrogant people are very from, right? They're part of the religion of the self. And who do they worship? Themselves. And who do they serve? Themselves. And who are they worried about? Themselves. So what's arrogance? Arrogance is I built a bama and I sacrifice on it every single day to me. I am the be-all, end-all of life. Incredible. So Gemara says, "My yad lo yinak." And what does mean yad lo yinak? Amrav kolabal ishes afilu hikneu la Kadosh Baruch Hu Shmai Baris ka'Avraham Avinu dichsev bei harimosi yadi el Hashem kel elyon konei shayim va'aretz lo yinake medina shel Gehenna. So we'll say. So ultimately, again, the Gemara says, what does mean yad lo yinak? Means even if a person was like has the piety of Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu, who went ahead and said, "Harimosi yadi," I lift my hand to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kel Elyon. So even a person that's like Avraham Avinu lifts his hand, literally again giving heaven and earth to Hashem, ultimately he will not be cleansed from the din of Gehenna. We'll say once again, why such severity attached to adultery? Because it represents one of these averos, where even if I get to a level of tshuva, at the end of the day, I cannot dial back the unintended consequences. Kashu Shila, Hai Yad Liad Lo Yinake, Yadimi Bryna, you should say Yadi. So Ella Amri Debei Rabbi Shila, Afilu Kibel Torah Kimosh Rabbeinu, Dichsiv Bei, Mimino Ish Das Lamo, Lo Yinake, Medina. So we're going to do, we're going to stop over here for today. We'll stop here for today, because again, we'll pick up with actually, let's just finish this up. He says, even if like Moshe, fine, you pushed me. Let's just finish. He goes, says, even if like Moshe Rabbeinu b'chsibei mimino eish das lamo lo yinakem medina shagin. Both say, isn't this incredible? The Gemara is saying over here. Both say, I just want to point something out, which is just, it's so riveting. Here's what the Gemara is saying: person commits adultery, even if they're like Avraham Avinu, where you Torah use lashon of yad, even if they're like Moshe Rabbeinu. So ultimately, again, they're not going to be cleansed from the din of Gehenna. Both say, what's your kasha? Well, obviously, if you're committing adultery, then what? Then you're what? You're right. Excuse me, sir. I knew Avraham Avinu, and you are no Avraham Avinu, right? I knew Moshe, right? So what's that? You hear what the Gemara is saying over here? Hear what the Gemara is saying? Even if a person is like Avraham Avinu, if he committed adultery, he can't be saved from the din of Gehenna. Even if a person was like a Moshe Rabbeinu, if he committed adultery, he can't be saved from Gehenna. Both say, Isn't that a stira minei ubei? Isn't that an inherent contradiction? If you're committing adultery, you're not armin. So what Yisrael will say? Yisrael shechata, right? Yisrael afapi shechata. Yisrael will say, we all live with contradictions. We all live with contradictions. There are parts of me, and there are days, and there are moments where I am Kodesh Kadoshim. Where literally, again, I am Moshe Rabbeinu. I've mentioned this many times. The Satmarav, the Tzaddik HaShalach quotes the Halach in Shulchan Aruch that says that if a mother can't nurse her child and has to hire a wet nurse, so ultimately she should try to go ahead and hire a Jewish woman to nurse her baby. Right? What's the makar for this halacha? Moshe Rabbeinu. Because when Yocheved, right, when Bas Parah wasn't able to nurse, so ultimately again she hires a Jewish wet nurse. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu only nursed from a Jewish woman. Ask the Satmarav, Zuchusa Yagin Aleinu. But that's Moshe Rabbeinu. Why are you bringing a raya from Moshe Rabbeinu to every single kid? And what's the answer? Because every single kid has the capacity to be a Moshe Rabbeinu. That's what the Shulchan Aruch is telling you. So in other words, I want to say we live with this dichotomy that on one hand, there are moments where I'm a Moshe. There are moments where I'm an Avraham Avinu, and yet in the very next moment, right, I could be the lowest of the low. Right? And I want to say, that's the power of the Yid. I can soar to the highest heights, and I can also sink to the lowest depths as well. And it's not a contradiction. It's the same person. It's the same person. And I want to say, we all live with these contradictions. Sometimes they're more pronounced, sometimes they're a bit more nuanced, but we always live, like in Chassidus, there's this kind of ratzah v'shov, right? There's a forward movement, a back movement, and that's always how I'm living. So no, it's not a contradiction to say that even a person who was like a Moshe Rabbeinu committed adultery, or a person who was like an Avraham Avinu committed, because all of us have this capacity for incredible spiritual greatness, but at the same time for making dramatic mistakes. And that's why in those moments, when we make dramatic mistakes, and we think that we are down and out and cannot recover, we have to remember the tzad of Moshe Rabbeinu that exists with us, the tzad of Avinu which exists with us. Okay, we'll say now, I'll stop over here. Shkoyach. We're going to continue tomorrow.